Sanand sir, has Patnavan sir come? Has he joined?
He's here.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, okay. Speaking, sir. Let us begin.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay. Sanand, please carry on, Sanand.
Okay. Okay. A very good evening to all. This is the third lecture in the National Lecture Series organized by All Kerala Private Colleges Association, NEP-CTK. In the first lecture, we discussed about NEP and multidisciplinarity. Dr. Rajesh from Tata Institute of Social Science, Hyderabad, exposed how the framers misuse the term multidisciplinarity by analyzing various notions of the actual concept. And in the second lecture, we had Professor Arun Kumar from Institute of Social Sciences, New Delhi, talked about does NEP meet the challenge of knowledge generation. And in this third lecture, we have Dr. Ishita Mukhopadhyaya, Professor of Economics from the University of Calcutta is without. And today's topic is equity concerns of new education policy. And first, I would like to call or invite Dr. R. Bindu, member AKBCDA Working Committee, for welcoming all. Over to Professor Bindu.
Am I audible?
Yes, please.
Respected resource person, Dr. Ishida Mukhopadhyay, respected leaders of AKPCTA, moderator, Dr. Sanand Sadanand. On behalf of AKPCTA, let me welcome you all to the third lecture in the webinar series conducted on National Education Policy 2020. As a responsible teachers organization upholding progressive ideals, AKPCTA is deeply concerned about the social consequences, far-reaching social consequences of this policy document, because it is completely silent about access, equity, social justice, gender justice, etc. In a highly hierarchical society like India, this kind of a document, many dangerous situations. There are seeds of danger embedded in this document, and our organization is completely aware of these consequences. That is why the Academic Committee of AKPCTA has decided to conduct this webinar series. There are chances of overt commercialization, communalization, and elitism, which this document may bring in. Issues like social justice should be addressed with utmost responsibility. Today's lecture addresses such issues related to equity issues as they are represented in national education policy, expressed or non-expressed. So, my mission is to welcome you all to this seminar, especially our resource person, Dr. Ishida Mukhopadhyay, Head of the Department of Economics, Professor of Economics, University of Calcutta. She is my colleague in the Central Committee of All India Democratic Women's Association. And in that committee, she is the expert in the field of education. She is dealing with the issues connected with education in our Central Committee. With utmost happiness, let me welcome Dr. Ishida, the resource person of today's webinar, to the platform. As a matter of formality, let me welcome Dr. Sanand Sadanandan, who is acting as the moderator of today's session. We have with us today our state office bearers of AKPCTA, Dr. C. Padmanabhan and Dr. Joji Alex and Professor Reggie Olina. I welcome them all as a matter of formality, and once again extending my greetings and welcome to all those who are present in this webinar. I hand over the platform to Sanand Sadanand, who acts as the moderator of this session.
Thank you, Dr. Bindu. Let me enter into the actual lecture. The speakers of the day, Dr. Ishida Mukhopadhyaya, Dr. Bindu are Working Committee Member AKPCTA, Dr. Suboj Pebikuti, Member State Academic Committee, and other office bearers of AKPCTA, fellow comrades, and all other democratic aspirants. This is the third lecture, and here we pointed out the topic equity concerns of NEP. In the 66-page report, the word equity used frequently. It is often used interchangeably with the related principle of equality. Many of us use the term equity and equality simultaneously. Equity means treating every student the same. Equity means making sure every student has the support they need to be successful. So, equity has a wider meaning. It refers to the principle of fairness. Equity in education means person or social circumstances such as family background, religion, caste, gender, and ethnicity are not obstacles to achieve educational potential, and that all individuals a basic minimum level of skills. And in the NEP text, as we know in the 66-page report, the word equity used frequently. I just count, using the word count, and it's used 20 times they use the term equity in this report. And this is not a small number. For example, it's used certain other words like multidisciplinary, they used 70 times, and holistic used 41 times, and Sanskrit, the word Sanskrit repeated 23 times. So along with these keywords, they use equity as a major concern for them. On the same time, another interesting thing is that certain other words, like the word constitution, they used only 19 occasions, and equality only 9 times, only 5 times, minorities only 2 times, and secularism, usage of the word secularism in the chart. So from the first look, we feel that they use the term equity in many occasions. But what are the actual facts? For example, in the text, in the chapter 6.1 of the draft, policy states that education is the single greatest tool for achieving social justice and equality. The education system must aim to benefit India's children so that no child loses any opportunity to learn and excel because of circumstances of birth or background. Again, while dealing higher education in chapter 14, it stated that the policy ensuring equitable access to quality education to all students with a special emphasis on socio-economically disadvantaged groups. But in a closer analysis of the lines of NEP, we can understand it stands for privatization of education, commodification of education, and it stands for foreign universities. But on the same, in text, it used the term equity repeatedly. So our duty here is to reveal this double standard before the public. And we got a right person for that purpose. Let me honestly invite our chief guest of the day, Dr. Ishida Mukhopadhyaya, on this topic. Over to you, madam, please.
Yes.
Ma'am, please switch on your mic.
Yeah. Now, am I audible?
Thank you. Yeah. Now.
Now, thank you very much for organizing this, and thank you for inviting me and and allowing me to share some of my thoughts to you. Yes, we are in the middle of a battlefield. What is the battlefield and what are we fighting for? It's a struggle of all who are in our teaching community, who have been in the struggle for right to education for all. The word equity, already our moderator has mentioned that how many times it has been mentioned. Now that is the trick of the 66-page document. It is very tricky in words. Very tricky in words, very tricky in introduction, very tricky in the whole idea, presentation of the whole idea. It's a tricky placement of the way in which education is visualized by the present regime in India. Now, how is education visualized in this 66-page document, and how it has deviated from our earlier way of visualizations? Now, India as a nation already had a visualization of education. What was that vision? That vision was speaking about universalization of education. Now, when did it come about in universalization of education? I'm just recalling a little bit of our historical facts that why can't we place this document in the context of the way in which India and Indians have visualized education? Now, universalization of education came in the post-colonial period immediately after India gained independence. And if we go back a little further to the colonial struggle, we find that education has been one of the tools of fighting for this education. And if you look into the fact that educating Indians was one of the instruments in which India was thinking of nation building. We hear of Savitri Bai Phule, we hear of Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar in West Bengal and Savitri Bai Phule in Maharashtra, and there are many others who were using education as a tool of equalizer. And really, Indians after independence were trying to look at education is one of the best tools of equalization. Now, what is this? How do we know this? What is this equalization? That India is being deeply ridden in class, caste, gender, and all other kinds of inequalities and inequities. That when students are coming out of this circumstances, that if they gain education, then they they would achieve equity. Now, how do we know this? I just want to start with, before scanning this document before you and just looking and searching like you, that where is this equalizer and where is this equity concerns, that where is, how concerned is our regime towards equity. Let me refer to a survey that was done by a body in the 60s, which was repeated in the late 70s, late 70s. When India gained independence, and if the households, if the families gained some additional income, if they were asked that, how would you want to invest this? What do you want to do with this extra money you get? They would say, most of them would say that they would buy land. So land was thought to be an equalizer because, as you know, that uh, land holdings and the right over land was thought to be, it was a semi-feudal, semi-capitalist setup when India started. And so land was supposed to be the most non-equitable resource, and access to land is the is really the way in which one can bring equity. Now, whether this is true or false, I'm not arguing on that. Whether this still remains or not, I'm not arguing. That is not my purpose. My purpose is to look at this repeat survey by National Council of Applied Economics. And that survey was finding that in the late 70s, early 80s, these survey results are telling that the families or the households are now using this extra money for education because they think education is being one of the equalizer, that equity would be achieved through education. And even if this was visible in the classrooms, so everybody wanted education. Demand for education was very high in the country. The only thing is that there were dropouts, and there was exclusion. Exclusion meaning it's not the fact that people are not demanding education, that they are not trying to send their children sent to schools, colleges, and universities. Rather, they couldn't afford sometimes, because why they couldn't afford? Not that only the fact they didn't have the money to afford, but schools, colleges, and universities were not there in all places. So the way of universalization of education was taking place across all geographical kinds of communities. Now, as you can see, equalizers and equity have this has got many dimensions. But universalization of universalization of education, and education as a nation building equalizer agent, was the perception of Indians, was the perception of the earlier education commissions, which is not at all referred, only a few lines in the whole 66-page draft. Now, where is the concern for equity coming? The draft mentions very cleverly that this is a part of our India's effort that in achieving goal number 4 in Sustainable Development Goals. So, looking into inclusive and equitable quality education. This was mentioned in the 66-page draft. But Indians were already visualizing this inclusiveness, and whenever education was being talked about, we were trying to look into, the Indians were trying to talk about preventing dropouts, how to prevent dropouts, how to bring everybody to the classrooms, how to use our schools, colleges, and universities as this equalizer agent. Now, this exclusion can come in not only in regions, but also in languages, but also in according to the other kinds of disabilities, etc. If we try to look into the section 4.9, 4.10, 4.11, 4.12, they were trying to talk about the 66-page draft is talking about empowering the students through flexibility in course choices and multilingualism and 3-language formula, etc., etc. Many languages are mentioned. Never is mentioned a very rich language, Urdu. If you look at Urdu, if you look at what languages are mentioned, uh, the languages which has got rich oral and written traditions, who doesn't know that Urdu has got a very rich oral and written tradition? Has been an identification of Urdu with a religious community, which is unfortunate. Sorry, I don't prefer to use this English word because I don't believe in fortunes. But finding an appropriate word for that. So identifying Urdu as identifying Urdu with a community is there. Again, if you talk about the languages, there are references to Sanskrit, there are references to Pali, there are references to other languages which are hardly used now. Now, there have been these languages like Greek, like Latin, etc. But wherever, in which country of the world, they have been made mandatory, or they are being taught in the school curriculum right from the beginning. Now, if you're trying to look into the Omoto sense way of looking at, and the United Nations way of UNDP ways of looking at a human development indices, then one of these the essential dimension of human development is education. And if we try to look into the education, the marker has been literacy, the marker has been inclusiveness, marker has been how many from all sections you have been able to include in the in the classroom. Now, in this language, we find exclusion not only in Urdu, but also in many other kinds of languages. This is one, I'm referring to languages. The second is, if we try to look into education, one is the curricular education. The curricular education meaning that secondary has secondary, and then you have college, you have the higher education. If we look at the split, the way it has been being split up, the way the years, the number of years, you know that this number of years has been very important as far as the equalizer agent, as far as the equity concerns are there. How many years of schooling? This is one of the markers again of equity. That how many years of schooling, how many years of education you have been into. That it's a marker. And if we look at this marker, this division 5+4 and 4, etc., etc., 4 years of a college course, and then I'm coming to the higher education. So if you look at this marker, then where is the equity? Because instead of bringing children from all families, irrespective of their class, gender, irrespective of their caste, irrespective of their regions. So if you want to bring them, then you have to prevent dropouts. And if we have these different levels, if you have more levels in the elementary education, that is in the school education, if you break it up into more and more levels, there will be dropouts at each level. That has been our experience. So there will be dropouts at each level, meaning that you are giving them a kind of an end of the course certificate. So you're marking the end of the course, and while you're marking the end of the course, that would mean that you are legitimizing dropouts. So inequity is legitimized in a clever way, in a tricky way, in the whole document. How is this coming up and reflected in the higher education? See, higher education is already having lesser and lesser percentage of youth, 20 to 20 till 18 to 24 years of youth, that they are in higher education. Already the percentage was 7 to 8%, then only slightly going up to 11 to 12%. This was already fewer in number in our country. And this was already a matter of concern. Now, as you can see, this matter of concern, the problem is not with bringing them to colleges. The problem with the fact that sometimes they do not have colleges in their districts, in their villages, in their areas, and it conflicts with the fact that they need to work at a very early age. So the problem is that when they are getting graduation degree, this was lengthened. The period is becoming a long period from 3 years to 4 years. But after the 4 years, so if it is to invest in 4 more years, you are to bar many students from the vulnerable sections of the society, from the marginalized sections of the society. The word equity comes in when you are barring the marginal sections, marginal families, students coming from the marginal families of the society. The choice is whether they would invest 3 more years or not of higher education. They would if the time is short. So what happens is that it's just the reverse of what is happening in school education. In the school education, if you split it up into more small number of years, then you get students coming out, you get students getting out, leaving course at each stage. But when it is higher education, you do not prefer a long period. You prefer a short period, and this 3+2 in higher education has performed pretty well in our country. 3+2 have produced enough equalizers so that you see sections, you see representatives of the vulnerable sections up in the decision-making sector in our society, in our country, whatever visibility has been obtained. If you look at the visibility of the marginalized section, whatever has been obtained by this 3+2 division. So if it is a question of investing 3 years or 4 years, then maybe this may be a deterrent. This may act as a deterrent. This may act as an inequity. This may act as an equalizing factor. So what happens is this. This is becoming a place where inequity will come in. I'm coming to later the problems of inequity also, but this is the structural inequity that is being there. It is not mentioned very clearly in the document, the question of privatization or the question of corporatization. It's not clearly mentioned, but I am coming to this. That's also the largest source of inequity in this document. The document is very tricky and very clever onto this. In fact, I'll use the word sly here, because the document in a sly way has avoided this and has clearly stated that the state will take all the responsibilities. But that has created the greatest source of inequity. But I'm coming to that. But before that, let me talk about the structural inequities. Now, so no way to stop dropouts at each level of education. Clubbing, then what happens is that when it is talking about inequity, in the section 6, I think the language is there. Yes, it is in section 6. There are 20 points in section 6, and in the section 6, all from 6.1 to 6.20, it has clubbed all kinds of sources of inequities together into the special education thing. So what are these inequities? Socio-economic disadvantaged groups, gender, transgender, geographically located, disabilities, tribals. So there will be special educations for them. So do you think that all these inequities, all these sources of inequities are identical? Can you club all these inequities together? Are all these socio-economic inequities? Actually, if we look at tackling the question of inequity, two kinds of education systems go hand in hand with the curricular education. There are not two, there are three kinds of things rather. One is the special education, the other is the alternative education. What is that alternative education and what's the special education? Special education is not tackling at all the socio-economic inequities. So where has the question of reservation gone into? If you look at the question of tribals, the SC/ST, if you look at the question of tribals, all tribals, all tribals are not the same kind, are not facing the same kind of vulnerability. Let me mention here the tremendous heterogeneity among the tribal population in the dimensions of vulnerability. The tribal situation, the tribal people living in the forests in Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, and the tribals in the northeast are not facing the same vulnerabilities. So the tribals, this is just an example to tell you that there has been much heterogeneity in the tribal sections of the population. So if you look into the tribal sections of the population, if you club them all together, and if you do not address the point from where the inequity is being rising, if you do not consider their access to education, then the inequity is being strengthened. Geographical inequity, we are talking about their geographical inequity, the 66-page document. At the same time, they are talking about clusters and district headquarters. They are talking about combining schools, combining colleges, combining educational centers into the district headquarters, that if a center, if a school or a college is having a fewer number of students, then why don't you combine it make it a cluster with the other together, and why don't the district headquarters be there? And I'm mentioning what are the points of difficulties here, and how much challenged is the marginalized population today in India. So why? Because if you look at the access to education from the point of view of human development, we talk about access, that how much access to education, then the distance between the home, the residence, and the educational center is a crucial factor determining access. That is, if the district headquarters, if the college and the school is located in the district headquarters, then who will bear the transportation cost? Who will bear this time and energy of visiting there? So there will be sharking of education and there will be exclusion. There may be forest lands, there may be rugged places, there may be mountains, like in the northeast area, or like in the Himachal area, where the students are climbing up mountains and going to the places, and there may be fewer people there. So there may be forest lands and there may be fewer students there. Only if the college or the school is there, they will be getting education. If they are asked to travel to district headquarters, if they are asked to travel to another place, they will not. So who will take care of the distance? This infrastructure is there just for access. So in the whole 66-page document, the question of access to education is not there, how can you bring in equity? How can you mention the word equity? How can you mention the word universalization of education without talking of access at all? Accessibility of education to the vulnerable sections is is depending upon the understanding of vulnerability by the present regime. So they understand vulnerability of caste, tribes, physical, mental disability, and gender, transgender. They want it together. Yes, access to education is clearly having a gender dimension. If it is of sending women to school, if it is of sending adolescent girls to school, adolescent girls will not be sent to school by traveling. If only there is a school, college there. We know the problem. We know the problem of advancing patriarchy by the present regime also. We know the problem in the way the perceptions of women's liberation is being talked about. The only talk of liberated women in the whole document is mentioning a few ancient, is mentioning Maitreyi Gargi of ancient India, who were ascetics, who were ascetics. But Vedic India or ancient India was not a very gender neutral kind of India that has been clearly depicted by the historians of our country. It is only with respect to 2-3 Brahminical, patriarchal, powerful peoples, powerful societies who were there, who were talking about who could get access to education, but not the others. I'm not talking about this today, about the historical total denial of history in the whole document. Where is the equity coming from? So clubbing all this into special education, alternative education. What is the alternative education? That is the education going side by side with the ICDS centers, taking care of the education and health together. They were talking about the mental and the development of the brain, but the crucial factor for development of the brain is the body mass index, which required nutrition, which required nutritional supplements, which is given by ICDS. ICDS is a residence-based, home-based, village-based, and urban area-based, where they would visit door-to-door service. So that has been clubbed to the mainstream education. So alternative education, the para teachers, the other kinds of, you speak in different names of this alternative education, that is taking care of those who are excluded by the process of mainstream education. So mainstream education is supplemented by this alternative educational setup. So in this 66-page document, they have clubbed together all these alternative education to the main schools and colleges. Now see what is happening. Alternative education has been existing in our country to take care of access and equity. And if alternative education is being mainstreamed, then you are losing equity. You are losing the battle of equity. So then you are inviting more and more inequitable access to education. So the other is the whole vision of equity, this document in the whole 6.16 to 6.20 is the vision, is reflected that you can club all kinds of inequities together. You can look at all dimensions together. You can club in everything together, meaning that you are not clubbing, you are not actually addressing inequity. So yes, the word secularism is absent. There has been silenced. So the question of diversity in our country and the way in which this diversity and uneven capitalist development in our country has given rise to differential access to education, this has been totally unaddressed. And there is a silence on this. If you look into the way in which the perception of higher education is being visualized and also school education is being visualized in the sections, in fact, in problems of higher education, this is very much visible in the problems of higher education in section 9.2, where 10 problems that have been identified. And it has come out very well. These 10 problems, neither of the 10 problems addresses the question of equity, addresses the question of access. If we look at the 10 problems, the focus of the 10 problems is management and regulation. The ICDS service was catering to the house-to-house service. Colleges with you can have clusters with more than 3,000 students. So if you look at these, the concerns, so the problem is you do not have a big infrastructure. There is not much investment in big infrastructure. So you have institutional restructuring and consolidation. That is in section 10. If you look at the 10 problems, the management, regulation, good structures, a good building, having a very good building of ICDS center, having a vast campus for ICDS center will not bring students to which the alternative education caters to. And it is combining the ICDS with midday meal is not taking care at all of these factors. Now, in the same vision persists to the higher education. It's totally on management and this regulation. Now, look into the question of knowledge hubs. Now, again, this vision is there. The multidisciplinary, this word is mentioned more than once, and multidisciplinary is being the buzzword of this 66-page document. Now, is multidisciplinary related to equity? Yes. Specialization, specialized knowledge skills is being hardly mentioned here. The specific taking care of scientific attitude, specific taking care of the structural inequities is not mentioned. What is the problem with multidisciplinary? No, there is not a problem with multidisciplinary. If you look at this multidisciplinary is not, the concept of multidisciplinarity is not replacement of disciplines, the basic disciplines. Multidisciplinary, right from the very beginning, right from the childhood till the end of the course, is not catering to building up in-depth disciplinary setup. So there is no mention of what will happen to bringing up scientists, what will happen to bringing up or historians, sociologists, what will happen to bringing up our medical students. How will these happen to this? This was happening in India, and disciplinary specializations, disciplinarity Specialization has been one of the buzzwords in the higher education, but look at the way in which this has been built into 4 years of college teaching, and after these 4 years, it's optional. You can take the you can have a 1 year degree of post graduation, or you can have a 2 year degree, or you can directly go to a PhD. Now, what is a PhD program going into? And you are doing away with the MPhil program. Where is the inequity coming? Is that if we think that education is an equalizer for change, MPhil and PhD were research degrees, and MPhil and PhDs were taking care of obviously specializations. So MPhil was bringing up some specialized knowledge building process. For example, there are some areas where you do not have mainstream education, and it will also be overlooked in the multidisciplinary setup. One is, of course, talking about gender, talking about the gender studies curriculum, of course, talking about the disability studies, of course, talking about the human rights, which are taking care, and also talking about if we look up at the technology also, that is the specialized technical skill, technical knowledge. And there are some special areas like in taking care of psychological, clinical psychology, which is specially offered, where they offer specially MPhil courses. So this is a marker of a specialized program in a specialized knowledge. So specialization in terms of research and in terms of also a good quality of life comes up from used to come up. Why do I say comes up, but used to come up from these MPhils? So MPhils have been done away with. You do not need these kinds of marks. So where is the equity coming from? The service catered to the society from the specialized knowledge skills was sometimes given, came out of the MPhil courses. What about the PhDs, which are talking about the doctoral degrees? How would this come about? Now, the doctoral degrees, look at the way they are to take care of obviously specialized knowledges. And if we talk about addressing the question of inequity and has been an equalizer, this equalizer knowledge must have, there has been some expression of this equalizer as far as the higher education and the PhDs are going on. So the way in which after 4 years of having a multidisciplinary knowledge, one is directly moving on to a specialized knowledge of PhD, there would be dilution of this research programs. There has been already a dilution by having a centralized control of research by the National Research Foundation. Centralized control of research means the regime doesn't want research to go on in all areas. The regime is totally against this whole 66-page document, is totally against building up talents, exposure of talents. Equalizer means you are exposing talents out of marginalized section, but talents in the marginalized sections will be overlooked. Many of these talents will be focusing on or going into not into the mainstream education, but into the voluntary, but into the kind of this the other kinds of, in fact, the vocational courses. Vocational courses has there you can leave any course and go to the vocational course. While this has been already there, but this is also raising the fear of won't this bring in the process of legitimizing school leaving, legitimizing dropouts and joining the labor force. joining the labor force. That is also another question. Equalizer means people demand education because they want to join the labor force. They want to join, they want to be employed. And if they have employment, they can move up the ladder of this inequities. So inequity is imposing a hierarchical position. The moving up the ladder to inequity is something which they would the households would want to. So, but if you look into the way in which this has been visualized, the way in which the structure has been visualized, this moving up the ladder is being questioned. That if you are there, if you are in an inequitable position, you can be there. And there is a tidbit for you. The word skill has been used. Skill building. What kind of skill? The skill for the marginalized section who can work out, or who can work, and who can produce something. Small entrepreneurship. This has also been a buzzword nowadays. So looking into this whole structure, this clearly talks in terms of a English word K. K means that there will be two kinds of Indians, according to this 66-page document. One who will move up with the higher education, with technology and others, and the others will fall down and will be there in the lower age with vocational skill building, uh, producing small tidbits like that. This is the vision. Vision is of a K. Let me tell you from where this vision is originating. Why is the government doing all this? Why is this vision? What is the origin of this vision of this regime? The origin of this vision of this regime is a deep built-in privatization and commercialization of education, and also a built-in corporatization. Why? Because it's mentioned in this document that the intentions are like this: to build a big infrastructure, but intention is to build a district headquarter, but the government wants to spend 6% of its GDP, which it has never spent. But it's good that they think that 6% of GDP is to be spent. They know that this is the demand of the people of the country. That's why they mentioned in this document that we want to spend 6%, but it's not, the government is not capable to spend that much. So private or others may cooperate, and voluntary organizations may come in. So the philanthropic organizations may come in. So who are these philanthropic organizations? So this is the loophole, or this is the hole through which it is getting the entry towards privatization and corporatizations. And also this is being, why this question is being raised is that it was there earlier. It was there, the hint was there earlier in the World Trade Organizations. WTO was forcing India to push educational services as a tradable commodity. And if educational services are becoming a tradable commodity, the market for education is quite large in India, because people demand education. So as people demand education, there has been a market. So if education is being sold and bought as a commodity, if educational services are converted to commodities, then the WTO regime can bring in this corporatization. That is why the question of foreign universities, that is why the question of foreign investment, that is why the question of good infrastructure, big infrastructure, that is why the whole question of use of smartphones, use of online, replacement of classrooms through distance mode, Look at the way in which how many times, in fact, our moderator has very nicely mentioned the number of times, the statistics, number of times each word is mentioned. In fact, it's a lovely way of uh, going to the people to make them understand that why we are afraid, why we are enraged, why we are protesting against this policy. So if we look into this, way of looking at this, the smartphone has been used quite a number of times in this 66-page document. Never was in an educational document phone service was mentioned. Remember it earlier in an educational document. So who are gaining in the whole process? The companies, the corporate companies, the network companies. In the whole lockdown period, in the pandemic, while we are there, look the way in which people are not malnourished, people are dying of starvation, people have lost their jobs, but which these phone companies and these online companies are making all gains. So it is the corporates who are gainers in the whole process. So, and this is being there in the WTO document, but WTO has not been able to enforce many countries to go into this kind of conversion of education to educational services to commodity. Many countries resisted. As you see in the equations of the whole world, I'm not going to another area in the whole political economy of the world. If you look at it, that India is being siding with the far right forces, which are with the WTO. Very few countries will be with this initiative, but there is a contradiction that is being fermented in the entire country. This contradiction has become very sharp, come forward incidentally in the pandemic times. And the regime has very cleverly chosen the pandemic times to float this new education policy. This was the earlier 450 or 460 page draft in the 2019. And I think your organization, along with all our organizations, have sent critiques, have sent these, all these things. All of us have done it. But then it comes out with a very short, very clever 66-page document. So there has been a centralized control by this regime on the way in which the vulnerable communities are to be dealt into. The multidimensionality of the vulnerabilities have been clubbed into vulnerable sections. So if you're vulnerable in the K curve, you are on the down curve. You are on the lower side of the K. So those who can afford smartphones, those who will be affording this corporate education, there will be privatizations of universities to a large extent and corporatization of universities. Private universities were already there, but if it is within an universalization of education structure, if it is within a structure which is having a special emphasis on access to education, then it is accommodated within the private sector educational services also. But if it is under this deprioritization, what I'm calling it, it's a reversal of priorities. If it is a question of reversal of priorities, then the private will perform in a way in which it has not performed like that before. So it's a question of opportunity choices in investment, whether they will invest in education or they will invest in another industry. So educational services, we are selling services. We never thought that we teachers are sellers of commodities. We never thought like that. We never thought of looking at our students as buyers of commodities. We never thought when we were in our classrooms. Our classroom is the greatest equalizer that we have faced in our life. All of us are in this profession. Now the classroom will become a de-equalizer in the way the new visualized classrooms are being there. So you may have new buildings, you may have new new facilities. And while the teachers, with the teachers training and teachers recruitment, as I was looking at it, the inequity is also there. So those are the secondary inequities which are coming in. The inequity, in fact, can you imagine an ICDS instructor has been asked to take an online certification course for upgradation? Just can you imagine this? The Anganwadi teachers are being asked to do this. So can you imagine the question that the way they look at India, do they really know India? Yes, they know India. And they know that this would prohibit a large number of vulnerable population to get access to education. They want a K because the corporate regime and the way in which the capitalist profit, the new liberal India has moved into, they want this upper side of the K. But the way in which India as education, as a nation building, an equalizer kind of a principle performing kind of an apparatus has been there throughout this after 1947, has been totally reversed in this document. So there are many other points, but I don't want to take much of your time. You've already given me enough time. So thank you all, and I'll be happy to interact with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Thank you, madam, for your well-drafted presentation, and you cover a number of things here, not only about equity, but also when the basic structure of this NEP. And you start with the how in the post-colonial period, education as a tool for national building and equalization, and how it changed especially in this time, especially after this by this NEP, and how structurality is there in the text in the form of how it's not representing or talk about heterogeneity or effects or alternative education. So a number of topics. I'm not entering going to sum up the topic because we have enough time. A number of questions are here waiting for you. So now the forum is open for questions and comments. In two ways you can ask questions. Either you switch on your mic and you ask questions, or can post your questions or comments in the chat box. Madam, you can take 2 or 3 questions together. Is it okay for you?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's okay for me. Yeah,
Okay,
2-3 questions together. Yes.
Now it's open. You can put your questions. Yes, someone is asking question here. It's a technical delay or something else. Okay.
I would just, if people are, before taking questions, I would just add on to something to this,
Okay.
the whole perception.
Yes.
I would just add on to something that related to new education policy is something which has come in is regarding the massive record unemployment in the country. It has also been surfaced before this period. So that conversion of education to work, if we look at this data in the recent years, we find that India was also failing miserably with respect to this conversion of education to a work. So already inequity was emerging, not creeping in, but it was already being visible to a large extent before floating on this education course.
Okay.
Hello, ma'am.
For an open. Okay. Anyone? Dr. Subodh is here.
Yeah.
Okay. Subodh, sir, please.
Thanks, ma'am, for this wonderful presentation. Actually, my concern is that after Prime Minister called for this national education policy, Dr. Sundar Pichai actually planning to invest a huge amount in Reliance Industries. Do you think this is actually a pre-planned, or it is a good positive sign for privatization in national education policy? And another one is actually there is an investment from this world, basically, just a minute, World Bank. Actually, World Bank also planning to invest in education. Actually, 6 states are considering to revamp their education process to the World Bank investment. Actually, my concern is all these are actually giving a positive signal of privatization. How do you think about this, ma'am? Could you please give me more detail about this?
Yes, thank you very much for mentioning this deal which was mentioned, which by Sundar Pichai and Google, and in fact the Reliance. So this surfaced, but many others are not surfacing.
Right.
The whole privatization of these were coming in. They were waiting on the threshold, and it has been already been made to a custom, made to already been this sweeping, whispering campaign that to the people that please the private, cater to the private. This has been there already, and this was one or two of them surfaced, but the way in which the number of times the smartphones and these online platforms are being used. In fact, this is meaning that the government is sure of many other kinds of such engagements, which are clearly indicating profiteering motive from buying on selling educational services. And one of the questions that's coming, I'll combine it with you, that in the midst of privatization, education will surely become expensive. And how will equity become possible? It's not possible. Very cleverly mentioning equity, but within it, one or two lines, if you look at the paragraphs in the 66 page, each paragraph is, or 2 paragraphs at a stretch together, you will find 1, 2, 3 lines there where you find an explosive content of the rise of of education that was an equalizer. So this is not a contradiction. This is a sly way of going into commercialization, privatization, and corporatization. Let me tell you, the only good message out of this is that the regime cannot clearly tell what it likes to tell. It has to make a coating, a sugar coating of the kind of things that people want. So people doesn't want this. People want equity. The the cry for equity or the demand for education is there for people. So the sugarcoating is indicating that the regime is clearly aware of the fact that they cannot sell this, so they need this sugarcoating. And the whole document is very nicely sugar-coated so that people will say that, look, they're telling very good things. Look, the document is really telling you good things, while it is not indicating at all good things, particularly with respect to access and equity. Now, are there any
Thank
questions? I just
Okay, another question in the chat. Okay,
yes,
second question.
yes. Yeah. Second one, I have. Yeah,
Okay.
there is second one. Yes, privatization. I have. Access and equity has been ignored. Access and equity. Access is not mentioned, not clearly mentioned at all. They are talking about SDG goals, Sustainable Development Goals, is coming out of the UNDP's this human development concept. But this is clearly talking about access. Where is this access becoming visible here?
Dr. Ishida, you have
Yes.
referred to the issues related to vocational training,
Yes.
possibilities of creating a clear division between different classes. My question is this: can we completely rule out the possibilities of regressing into the old Varnashrama structure? In ancient India, formal education was negated or denied to the skilled artisans. Such a thing will be repeated or reiterated, I think. What is your opinion regarding this?
Yes, Bindu, I'm completely agree with you. Actually, if you look into this, the whole document, the document mentions ancient India. Document is totally silent on medieval India. And then document is also silent on the whole freedom struggle of independent India, bringing India independence and the role of education. Document is also silent on even the Nobel laureates who have made Indians, inspired India for a long period of time. It doesn't mention at all any Nobel laureate. It doesn't mention. So, going back, regressing, is there in the introduction itself. It's talking about Varahomihir, it's talking about Chanakya, it's all talking about all of these people, never talking about C.N.R. Rao, never talking about Rabindranath Tagore, never talking about the other achievers, even not Sen at all. And other even the Nobel laureate have been many. So it is totally it is planfully ignoring modern India, independent India, post-independent India, post-independent restructuring India, and also look at the education commissions. It is just a few lines on the earlier education commissions. So what does it really mean? It's really mean you are visualizing India only in the ancient Indian landscape. And if you look at ancient India, it is not really the India that is visible now. And if you look at the silence regarding this the Urdu language, India and Pakistan shared a common colonial history. So till 1947, the history was equal, the same history. So if you refer to ancient times, it's the same history. So it's not being referred to at all. So it's a regression, suppression of also the ancient Indian facts. If you look into the ancient India, it is giving a kind of a vision which is not also the ancient India. So that's a different debate. I'm not coming to the historical. It's really looking into the Varnashram. See, if they go away with the other religions, if it is the only Hindutva. In fact, Romila Thapar clearly mentioned that we are standing before a Hindu regime. We are standing on the threshold. This has been the fear. And Professor Ethan Habib also talked about that we are in the battlefield. We have to strive for education. We have to strive for equity. So we are in the battlefield with our regime. So it's really so. If the vision wants to regress India, will India regress or progress? So we teachers have to stand on the line of progression. It's no way. The teachers have always done that. So teachers have to stand on that, right? So and with that, even within the Hindus, then the Varnashrama, only the Brahminical patriarchy will remain. So it is going against women, against all kinds of vulnerabilities. And there are other questions, yes. And the
One question in the chat box. A couple of questions in the
I'm
chat
looking at
box.
the chat box. What
One
is the
from
second
Smida.
issue?
One from Smida. Yes.
NEP appears, yes. NEP appears to have been, Jimmy James have asked that NEP appears to have been able to bluff the same set of people who are its victim by offering job opportunities. Yes, but what kind of job opportunities? I'm not very hopeful about job opportunities also, because people are losing jobs. And it is moving into a kind of situation which will lead to more unrest among the people, more disputes among the people. It's not going into the kind of educated Indians building up the nation. The whole idea of nation is a different kind of a nation. It's a different kind of a country that is being visualized there. So they are giving job opportunities, meaning what kind of jobs? Even in the education sector, what kind of, if you look at the recruitment, what kind of job policies are there? Even in our sector, there are the jobs. There have been record unemployment. So those lured by jobs rather than intellectual growth, I want to consider it a more practical than ideal goal of education. See, the ideal goal of education is nation building. So the way in which education is being offered, what education is offered in the classrooms is becoming very important. And the socialization that education is leading up into the classroom has been one of the ways in which equity is being tackled, in which equalizer is being there. So community reservation new policies, yes, section 4.2, section the others. If you look into it, clubbing special education, clubbing all kinds of vulnerabilities together, reservation together. There will be ashram shalas for the tribal communities, it has been stated. So they will be having ashram shala. So what about the reservation policy? What about the reservation policy of SC/STs which has been there, which has been one of the ways in which we have attempted to equalize, but is still not visible. Still, there have been tremendous vulnerability, and we have yawning vulnerability. So the question of community reservation has been a big question, because there is no specificity, there is no specific mention of that. So these are the two questions which I met in the chat box. Now, are there anything else? So that is there anything else?
I think
So
one question before posted by Smita is, in the midst of privatization, education will surely become more expensive. Then how the equity will be possible, ma'am?
Yes, I have answered it right in the very beginning when addressing this question of this Reliance and Sundar Pichai, this Google, and this combining. So yes, it will be expensive, and that's why I'm referring to the English letter K. So English letter K is against equity. And if you look at the question of regressiveness, if you look at the question of gender question, inequity, if you look at these questions, adolescent girls and women will be prevented more from going into these colleges and schools. due to these advantages, due to these expensive uh, cases, and transgenders. I think Kerala knows very well how to mainstream transgender. It has been one of the icons of the way in which transgenders have been mainstreamed. But if you look at the vulnerability of the transgenders, then they will be, um, how will they get entry into these expensive places? So the K is significant also as a tremendous concern of the inequity. So what I visualize is this K form. Yes.
Hello, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Yeah, I am Lakshmi Priya.
Yes.
Ma'am, this our national education policy, in effect, advocates increased use of technology with equity in one of its pages, right?
Yes.
And what do you think about this, especially in this COVID-19 scenario? We know we have shifted to online education, and we know there is a huge digital gap.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So how can we? What is your opinion on this particular idea of advocating equity with technology?
See, it's a funny way in which the use of technology is being combined with education. The only way in which education can use technology has been thought in terms of online education, and in education going to a distance mode, that is avoiding classrooms, the replacement of classrooms through distance mode. This is not the only way in which technology can be used. There are many, because now we are moving into AI, artificial intelligence, so technology can be used in a different ways, in very different ways. But replacement of classrooms with the help of technology, is technology anti-socialization? Classrooms are socializing agents. Classrooms where the students of all sections come together and they mix up, they make friends, they are sitting down into their canteens, they discuss ideas and ideologies, and there is a teacher student interaction. The teachers, the way in which we have formed all of our teachers have their associations, the way in which we socialize, we exchange ideas. This is the social exchange of ideas, is the visible outcome of access to education and addressing inequity, and education as an equalizing agent. But technology replacing the socialization process is a regressive way in which technology is being used. And digital divide, this is also talking about access. Digital divide is a division which is clearly talking about inequity in access to resources of education. One can use technology to enforce more socialization within the classrooms. That is, there can be technology aids in the classroom where the students can, teachers both use this in a socialized platform. And technology can bridge in gaps between continents, between the distances. That is a separate thing. But the way in which technology is being discussed in this document is clearly talking about the only way in which India has looked at technology is through smartphone, as if the smartphone is the only technology that India has been using. So that is pretty sad. It's not, the technology doesn't mean only this. It's a whole huge source of knowledge. Technology knowledge is a source of knowledge. They need specialization. Thank you.
Yeah, yes, ma'am. And that is the irony with which we can see that we have actually the GAR, gross enrollment ratio, they're trying to increase this with online education. So that is that is an irony in that.
That's an irony. That's an irony.
Yeah.
I think we cover a number of topics. So thank you, ma'am, for your valuable time. And here I thank Dr. Subbu, Bindu, Dr. Smita, Jimmy James, Baburaj Kawat, Lakshmi Priya for their questions to make this session an interactive one. Ma'am, anything else to conclude from your part?
So